Thank you very much, Tom. Before I begin, I'd like to ask the standard question, which is, can everyone hear me okay? Good, excellent. I'm told that there is an issue of the Burlington Magazine on your seats. We're waiting to come home with you all, but unfortunately it's not the magazine in which this article that I'm going to speak to you about featured. But you can all look that out in, I'm sure, all good bookstores and online repositories. So, in the fourth volume of his Anecdotes of Painting, published in 1771, Horace Walpole recalled attending a ball at Burlington House in Piccadilly. The ball lasted all night, and as it reached its close, at daybreak, looking out of the window to see the sun rise, I was surprised with the vision of the colonnade that fronted me. It seemed one of those edifices in fairy tales that are raised by genii in a night's time. This was the Doric colonnade that, with its associated stables and offices, once framed the entrance to the house from Piccadilly. Built for Richard Boyle, 3rd Earl of Burlington, the architect Earl, it was widely held to be one of the most splendid architectural compositions created in 18th century Britain. It was admired by later architects. William Chambers thought it ranked among the finest pieces of architecture in Europe, and Sir John Soane called it beautiful and noble, and thought that in its endless variety in the play of light and shadow, a powerful mind was visible throughout. Sadly, in spite of this acclaim, it was taken down in 1868 to make way for the Victorian remodelling of the house and courtyard for the Royal Academy and Learned Societies. The remains of the colonnade were moved south of the river to Battersea Park, where it was briefly hoped they would be used to create a bandstand. Nothing, however, came of this scheme, and in the end, these carefully numbered chunks of Portland stone were ground up to make builders hardcore. No fragments of them are known to survive. Although for many years the powerful mind described by Soane was once thought to be that of Burlington himself, it has since been established that the author of this celebrated colonnade and its adjacent wings was the Aberdeen-born, Rome-trained architect James Gibbs, who was then having his first taste of professional success in London. Not long after he was engaged, however, Gibbs's place at as Burlington's architect was taken by another Scot, Colin Campbell. He designed a gateway for the colonnade and added a new front to the Restoration-era house that was inspired by the works of Inigo Jones and Palladio. Campbell's front still survives, albeit somewhat smothered by Sidney Smirke's later additions to it. It has generally been assumed that Gibbs either produced no designs for the façade, or that if he did, they have been lost. This paper argues otherwise. It presents drawings by Gibbs which show that his involvement at Burlington House was greater than has hitherto been believed. Until now considered as being for another house, this paper demonstrates that these drawings illustrate his scheme for refacing Burlington's Piccadilly mansion. By bringing Gibbs's intentions into clear view, the paper greatly enhances our understanding of one of the most important private house commissions of 18th century Britain. It also sheds significant new light on the relationship between, and architectural approaches of, three of the century's most important British architects, Gibbs, Campbell, and Burlington. Three drawings for the design of the facade, here labelled drawings A, B, and C, survive in Gibbs' collection in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford. They're all elevations, no associated plans are known. Drawing A is the largest. Drawn on paper watermarked by a Strasbourg lily underneath the crown, the elevation is contained in a volume of drawings titled Several Drawings for Churches, Houses, Pulpits, Fretwork Ceilings, Chimney Pieces, Pedestals for Dials, Shields, etc. by J.G. The other two drawings are much smaller. They appear on the recto and the verso of the same sheet, something that is relatively uncommon among Gibbs's drawings. The paper is watermarked with a shield and a Strasbourg lily. Drawing B on the recto is outlined in black pen and rendered in grey wash, whereas drawing C on the verso appears to be an abandoned preparatory study, as the graphite underdrawing is only partially reinforced with black ink. These two drawings were probably prepared for inclusion in Gibbs's Book of Designs, a book of architecture, published in 1728. This is indicated by the title of the album in which they are found. Today, original drawings for the plates in Mr. Gibbs's Book of Designs and Ornaments, and for his book of rules for drawing the several parts of architecture, as likewise the Radcliffe Library. Further indications that they were intended for publication are the drawings reduced scale, the presence of extensive indentations made by a blind stylus, which probably relate to the process of transfer for engraving, and the fact that they follow on from a series of preparatory drawings for the publication. As the elevation does not feature in a book of architecture, Gibbs presumably changed his mind about including it before publication, something he's known to have done in other cases. No independent engravings of the design are known. An analysis of the draftsmanship suggests that drawing A is the earliest of the three, and that it dates to around 1716. Architectural drawings can be tricky to attribute and date, as they are worked up slowly and methodically. In the case of Gibbs, this is made still more difficult by the poor survival rate of early drawings in his hand. It is only around 1720, 5 years after his involvement with Burlington House and over a decade after his return from Italy, that our picture of his work as a draftsman becomes more complete. There are details of drawing A, however, that point to an early dating. The drawing's energetic technique, visible in the freehand representation of details such as the acanthus leaves of the Corinthian capitals, which I've highlighted here, the coat of arms, and the rapidly sketched in balusters, is strikingly confident, evidence surely of the remarkable fluency he had acquired during his years in Rome, and is quite unlike that of the drawings by Gibbs after 1720, of which drawing B is a good example. These are characterised by their precise control of line and meticulous use of grey wash. Drawing A compares closely, however, to a drawing by Gibbs datable to around 1716, a sectional study for the saloon of Sudbrick Lodge in Petersham, Surrey. There are many similarities between this drawing and drawing A, which is one of the few surviving sketches by the architect. One is a self-assured use of freehand pen to execute complex architectural details, as can be seen in the foliage of the capitals at Sudbrook. Another is the use of dabs of grey wash to indicate the shadows cast by foliate ornament, visible in the attic story at Sudbrook, from which the bands of the coffering spring. The parallels the shadows cast by the leaves on the capitals of drawing A. Other similarities include the way in which the entablature and pilaster bases have been lined in black ink with such speed that they overrun their bounds, and the summary depiction of the grotesque faces in the keystones. Drawings B and C date from around 1727-8, when Gibbs was at work on the Book of Architecture. The style of their draftsmanship is consistent with this dating. Drawing B is a finished presentational study executed with an even grey wash. This is typical of Gibbs's drawings from the 1720s onwards, when his practice entered its maturity. His collection of drawings in the Ashmolean includes many comparable examples, particularly among the preparatory drawings for his publications. Gibbs had begun to employ draftsmen around this date, so it could be that this consistency is partly due to his draftsman's influence, but it is perhaps more likely that Gibbs, who by then had a wide range of public and private commissions under his control, had simply evolved more efficient and consistent ways of working. Drawing C is an outlier as it is incomplete, but the fact that it is on the same sheet as drawing B makes it reasonable to assume that both drawings were made at the same time. The drawings all agree in their essential details. All three show a frontispiece of 11 bays, the outermost 2 bay sections of which project forward. The façade is defined by an order of Corinthian pilasters standing on a plinth, properly termed a giant order as the pilasters rise through 2 stories. Lights are inserted into the plinth level, indicating the presence of a basement. In the 3 central bays, the order steps forward to become 3/4 engaged columns, so in the middle there, that support a pediment containing a handsome coat of arms surmounted by an earl's coronet, crucial detail to which we'll return momentarily. The entablature carries balustrade. The front is ornamented with bands of channeled rustication. Designed in great skill, the rustication begins on the ground floor of the building at a subsidiary plinth level, placed just behind the order, and continues up to the level of the upper story, where the plinth returns to support another stack of rusticated strips that rise to the level of the astragals, or bases, of the capitals. Here, Gibbs deftly transitions the rustication into serving as impost arches for the fenestration, which takes the form of an arcade. So, to cut through all that jargon, the rustication begins down here, goes up there, and there's another plinth level here, which continues up to these are called imposts of the arcade, where the windows are. Here, Gibbs, yes. At the upper level, the windows are enclosed by round-headed arches with keystones, whereas those of the lower level are flat-headed with prominent voussoirs, which are these rusticated details radiating off from the top of the windows here. All these differences can be, in spite of these close similarities, we ought to note that there are some small discrepancies between these drawings. Drawing A shows grotesque faces in the keystones of the three central bays of the upper story that do not appear in drawings B or C. Moreover, the sides of the entrance stairs in drawing A are straight, whereas in the other two drawings they're curved. Finally, drawing B includes a row of monumental statues above the balustrade level that does not appear in either of the other two drawings. All of these differences can be accounted for by the process of revision that Gibbs undertook while preparing these designs for publication. Until now, these drawings have been associated with Gibbs' work at Cannons at Little Stanmore in Middlesex, now at the very end of the Jubilee line, a Jacobean house that was heavily remodelled in the early 18th century for James Bridges, Earl of Carnarvon, and subsequently 1st Duke of Chandos. The remodelling transformed Cannons into one of the most opulent houses of the age. Its extravagant scale was such that it was supposed by contemporaries to be Alexander Pope's model for the enormous and vulgar residence of Timon in his epistle to the Earl of Burlington, of which he wrote, "At Timon's villa let us pass a day, where all cry out, what sums are thrown away." The house was pulled down in 1747, following Chandos' death, and today only evocative fragments of it survive. Terry Freeman was apparently the first scholar to link these drawings to Cannons. He suggested that they show schemes for refacing the two facades of the house, on which Gibbs is known to have given advice. The drawings were published as such in his doctoral thesis and again in his monograph of 1984. Although Freeman did not support this identification with evidence, it has not been challenged in recent scholarship. There are, however, several reasons to think that Freeman was incorrect in identifying these drawings with Cannons. The first is the coat of arms shown in the pediments of drawings A and B. In both of these drawings, the supporters of the coat of arms are clearly lions, which you see on either side here. Carnarvon's supporters were not lions, however, but somewhat less frightening beasts, otters. Friedman noted this, but thought it may well have been the result of hurried sketching in of a required ornamental detail. The fact that the lions appear in both drawings A and B contradicts this, however, so too does the evidence of Gibbs' other drawings, in which a use of heraldry is generally accurate. In addition, there are significant discrepancies between Gibbs' drawings and the relevant fronts of Cannons. These are recorded in engravings made by Henry Hulsberg after drawings by the architect John Price, who, it should be noted, is described as the architect in both of the engravings. There are several points of disagreement between these engravings and our drawings. The porticos shown in the engravings are hexastyle, i.e. made of 6 columns, and not tetrastyle, formed of 4, which is the case with the Gibbs drawings. The order is Ionic and not Corinthian, as in our drawings. There is block and not channeled rustication, and there are arcaded windows in only 3 bays of the south front, rather than across the whole upper story. Furthermore, the lower windows are narrower than those of our drawings and set on consoles, and there are no projecting end sections. Finally, there is a clumsy attic story in Cannons in lieu of the elegant balustrade designed by Gibbs. Evidence beyond the drawings proves a point still more conclusively. Cannons was on a rectangular plan. It is known from surviving survey drawings that its width was 147 feet at its widest fronts, on the north and south of the house, and 123 feet at the narrower fronts on the west and east. The scales on drawings A and B, however, indicate that the width of the elevation was intended to be 130 feet. As we've noted, the new facades at Cannons were refacings of an earlier Jacobean house. Therefore, an architect working there would have been constrained by its dimensions. It must be considered very unlikely that Gibbs would have submitted a design that, at 130 feet long, was too short for 2 sides of the house and too broad for the others. It's reasonable to conclude, therefore, that these drawings were made for a different house. But which house? I've already demonstrated that drawing A was made early in Gibbs' career, and the coronet shows that the patron was an earl. Gibbs cannot be linked with many earls at this early date. As a result, the range of potential clients for the project is narrow. To find a match, we must again consider the coat of arms. The possibilities among Gibbs' early patrons include Robert Harley, 1st Earl of Oxford, and his son Edward, the 2nd Earl. But the heraldic evidence counts them out as their arms were supported by angels and not by lions, shown in the cartouches of drawings A and B. John Erskine, 6th and 22nd Earl of Mar, would be another possibility, but while one of his supporters was a lion, the other was a griffin. A less plausible candidate, suggested by William Wright Crandall in his seldom reliable 1933 catalogue of Gibbs drawings in the Ashmolean, is John Fitzwilliam, 2nd Earl of Fitzwilliam. Crandall thought these drawings may have been commissioned for his residence at Milton, Northamptonshire. Not only does the heraldry disprove this, Fitzwilliam's supporters were wild men wielding clubs, that's a technical term, but Gibbs cannot be associated with Fitzwilliam until 1726, too late for the evidently early date of drawing A. This leaves a final possibility, Richard Boyle, 3rd Earl of Burlington. Gibbs certainly worked for Burlington around this time, and looking at his coat of arms, we have a match, for Burlington's arms were indeed supported by lions. If this elevation was designed for Burlington, then it must surely have been for Burlington House. Details show that these drawings are designs for the main façade. As we have heard, the scales on 2 of the drawings show that the elevation was intended to be 130 feet wide. This is the precise width of the front of Old Burlington House before it was refaced by Colin Campbell, as depicted in the first volume of Vitruvius Britannicus, published by Campbell in 1715. In the 3rd volume of this publication, Campbell stated that the front of his own executed design was 132 feet, which, allowing for changes to the width of the facade made by the refacing, is also consistent with these drawings. If we look closely at Gibbs' drawings, we can see that they have features in common with Old Burlington House. These are the 2-storied facade of 11 bays, the raised plinth with lights inserted for a basement, and the projection of the 2 outer sections. There are also moments in the design when Gibbs can be seen to be responding to more subtly to features from the earlier building. One such is the pediment, which is an expanded and more commanding version of the somewhat diminutive central pediment shown in the 1st volume of Vitruvius Britannicus. Another is the string course, the line that divides the 2 stories, which perhaps gave Gibbs the idea of introducing the imposing giant order. You can see there's a string course in both Old Burlington House and in our drawings there. Similar too is the central door, which, as with the old house, is shown topped with a segmental pediment resting on consoles, although in drawings A and B, the pediment has been enlivened by the addition of a keystone. Finally, the tops of the capitals, which Gibbs intended to rise to a height of around 37 feet, would have come up to almost exactly the same level as the cornice of the older house. Notably, some of the same elements were taken over by Campbell in his own executed design for refacing the house. At 47 feet tall, Campbell's facade came up to exactly the same height intended by Gibbs. He similarly used a horizontal band to emphasize the division of the house into 2 stories, and, like Gibbs, also maintained the projection of the 2 bay outer sections. As in Gibbs' drawings, Campbell generally retained the original positioning of the windows, modifying them only in the end bays so as to include windows made of 3 lights, which are known as Serlianas or Venetian windows, which are these ones here. In other words, although they were working in very different stylistic idioms, Gibbs and Campbell both came up to similar solutions to the same architectural challenges, those which were posed by the refacing of Old Burlington House. An impression of just how closely Gibbs' design relates to the old house can be seen if we overlay Campbell's illustration of it with our drawing A. Here we can see that the relationship of Gibbs' front to the old building is closely similar to Campbell's, with the chief difference being in the additional height Gibbs brought his front by slightly deepening the basement level. The identification of these drawings with the facade of Burlington House brings new clarity to Gibbs' design of the colonnade, stables, and service wings, which, it can now be said, were carefully conceived to respond to details of its grand frontispiece. The channeled rustication of the projecting centre bays of the wings, which was repeated at the coins of on the edges of the buildings, so these things here, was intended to announce the primary ornamental feature of Gibbs's refacing of the main house. We can also see that the carved keystones shown in drawing A picked up a detail present in the wings, where the keystones under the doorcase pediments were carved with lions' heads. It may be that Gibbs similarly intended the keystones of the main facade to be carved with lions' heads, which were Burlington's heraldic supporter, and the indications on the drawing are too sketchy to allow us to be sure. Heraldry certainly played a role in the colonnade, where lions' heads alternated in the metopes with alternating bees and helms. Most dramatically of all, we can see that the now relative austerity of the Doric order that Gibbs chose for the colonnade was intended as a foil to the richness of the main façade, with its elaborate Corinthian order and banded rustication. A vivid idea of how this would all have looked if assembled together can be gathered from this conjectural illustration, for which I'm very grateful to the architect Francis Terry. If this design was for Burlington House, it raises the question of who commissioned it. Nicholas Savage has recently suggested that the patron of Gibbs' work at the house was not Lord Burlington, who did not reach his majority until the month before his return from Italy in May 1715, but his mother, the Dowager Countess Juliana. She certainly seems to have been responsible for a series of alterations to the interior of the house made during the early 1710s, foremost among which was the installation of installation of a large internal staircase that was decorated by the Venetian painters Giovanni Antonio Pellegrini and Marco Ricci. Savage has suggested that Gibbs was the architect chosen by the Dowager Countess to carry out these alterations, and that, a little later, she also hired him to create the offices and the colonnade in the forecourt. Although there is little either to support or disprove the first of these contentions, evidence can be cited to refute the second, which in turn should cause us to treat the first with considerable caution. Chief among the grounds for rejecting Savage's suggestion is Gibbs' direct testimony on this point. In his manuscript autobiography, the Gibbs manuscript, in Sir John Soane's Museum, London, he specifically states that it was the Earl of Burlington who had him build and adorn his house and offices in Piccadilly, as well as the fine circular colonnade fronting the house of the Doric order. We have no reason to doubt this generally reliable manuscript, but other evidence exists to lend the claim weight. Two engravings of Burlington House, one of the elevation and the other of the plan, were contained in the first volume of Campbell's Vitruvius Britannicus. As they record alterations to the fabric of the house that had been made since the early 1700s, they can be considered up-to-date and reliable illustrations. It is significant then that the plates give no indication either of the colonnade or of the wings. Likewise, the text, which was composed late in the publication process, makes no mention of them, or of any ongoing building work. If Savage is right, and the Dowager Countess commissioned Gibbs in the early 1710s, his work in the forecourt would probably have been considerably advanced by April or May 1715, when the first volume of Vitruvius Britannicus was published. This makes Campbell's omission more significant. Campbell, who would not have wanted his publication to appear out of date, by excluding this major new London project, would surely not have failed to mention it had it been underway. Additional supporting evidence comes in a letter written by Gibbs to his erstwhile patron, the Earl of Mar, in April 1716. In this, Mar writes that he supposes you have work enough upon your hands in Piccadilly, Hertfordshire, and at Richmond. What we know of Gibbs' ongoing commissions at this date means that these references must be to his work at Burlington House, Canons, and Sudbrook Lodge, respectively. Mar's letter was written in Avignon, where he was living in exile as a result in his prominent role in the failed 1715 Jacobite rebellion. This has led Savage to suggest that the information in the letter might have been out of date, but there are strong reasons to think that it was not. Other projects alluded to by Mar in this letter were contemporaneous with it. Gibbs received his first payment for canons in August 1716, indicating that he had probably started working there not long before. The references to Sudbrook can date no earlier than November 1715, when the project's patron, John Campbell, 2nd Duke of Argyll, purchased the land on which it was built. Gibbs' presence there can be documented from the 19th of that month. In a quirk of history, by the way, this was also the month in which Argyll, Gibbs' patron, and Mar both faced each other as commanders of opposing armies on the battlefield at Sheriffmuir. Finally, Mar had last been in London as late as August 1715. If Gibbs' work in Piccadilly had largely been completed before then, which is what Savage's chronology requires, he would have known about it. Mar's information was therefore in date. So if Gibbs' work at Piccadilly was still keeping him busy in 1716, well after Burlington had reached his majority, then it is far more probable that Burlington, rather than his mother, was the patron. Burlington ultimately chose Colin Campbell to reface his townhouse. Campbell, who dated his designs to 1717, pointedly did not name Gibbs when he explained that the stables were built by another architect before I had the honour of being called to his lordship's service, which obliged me to make the offices opposite conformable to them. In Campbell, Burlington had chosen an architect whose work was explicitly opposed to Gibbs's. His second volume of the Trevis Britannicus, published in 1717, the year he took over at Burlington House, included a barely disguised attack on Gibbs's Church of St Mary le Strand, which was then under construction. Although Gibbs continued to receive payment for his work at Burlington House as late as 1719, this was probably due to tardiness on the part of Burlington, who had an aristocratic disregard for the prompt settling of bills. Never again did Gibbs benefit from Burlington's famous patronage. He was not one of the architects whom he helped promote through the Royal Office of Works. Burlington did not subscribe to Gibbs's A Book of Architecture. It does not appear in the catalogue of his library, and nor do Gibbs' other two publications. All of this evidence points to the conclusion that Burlington fell out of love with Gibbs's designs. Why did this occur? And why did Burlington hire Gibbs in the first place? Surely the most plausible answer to both of these questions lies in Burlington's intellectual and personal development. At around 21 years of age, Burlington was still a young man when he hired Gibbs. He was fresh from his first tour of Italy, where he had stayed mainly in Rome. A little earlier, Gibbs had spent several years in the city, where he had trained as an architect. Burlington had met some of Gibbs's associates from his time there, among them the artist Henry Trench, who was an Irishman, and the tailor and the innkeeper, a Scotchman, Charles Brown, who was probably the Mr. Brown at whose lodging house Burlington stayed in the city. By the time of Burlington's return, Gibbs had become an architect of some note. In 1714, he had been appointed as surveyor to the Commission for 50 New Churches, and in the same year was commissioned to design the most prominently cited of these churches, St Mary le Strand. Young, artistically minded, and excited to have reached his majority, Burlington in all likelihood hired Gibbs because he was emerging as Britain's leading exponent of the Roman architectural ideas to which he had been so recently exposed. As Gibbs' work for him progressed, however, Burlington must have grown increasingly sure that this was not what he wanted. This is hard to understand if we have only the evidence of the service wings and colonnade. After all, the Doric colonnade in the courtyard was sober enough for previous historians to see it as being Burlington's own work. With the Ashmolean drawings now correctly identified, however, his change of mind is easier to comprehend. If the façade Burlington commissioned from Campbell, and indeed the buildings he was later to design himself, could be characterised as tending towards plainness or restraint, then what Gibbs had offered him here was elaboration. The extensive strip rustication means that every surface of Gibbs' façade would have been crowded with decorative carving. The boldness of the giant order, which architects in Burlington's circle generally did not use, combined with the projection of the wings, gives a drama to Gibbs' façade that is otherwise lacking in Burlington's own architecture. Looking at Gibbs' work in the courtyard as it grew nearer and nearer completion, and fully aware of what was about to follow on the façade, Burlington must have grown increasingly sure that this was not what he wanted. By turning to Campbell, he made clear that he wished to pursue a different approach. But Burlington eventually tired of Campbell. As he grew more confident, he realised that only he was best placed to interpret his architectural ideas, and so decided to practice as an architect himself. Burlington's experiments, first with Gibbs and then with Campbell, must be seen as important moments in the development of his architectural outlook. Thus, it was perhaps by studying, scrutinising, and ultimately rejecting the facade design that he began to hone his faculties as an architectural theorist and designer. But where does this leave Gibbs? Although doubtless disappointed by the loss of the commission, he did not lose faith in the quality of the design. As we have heard, around a decade later, he apparently considered including it in a book of architecture. By this point, he had recycled it into a new project, the university buildings in Cambridge, on which he was employed from around 1720. He did this essentially by expanding the projecting end sections of the house design and giving them tetrastyle porticos. Although the fate of this project too was unhappy, part of it, the Senate House, shown here on the right, was built and remains the site of the university's graduations today. By the time Gibbs was at work in Cambridge, Burlington was no longer a callow youth, but had become the influential tastemaker we know today, actively flexing his muscles of patronage in support of his favoured architects. Yet Gibbs here used a design of which he explicitly disapproved as the basis for a major new commission. How are we to account for this? Perhaps the best answer is that there was less of a consensus around questions of architectural style and taste in early 18th century Britain than has previously been taken to be the case. Burlington may have been trying forcefully and with success to promote his own approach to architecture, But there were other approaches too that coexisted with it in a state of creative tension. Gibbs, so often described as being the victim of Burlington's reform of taste, can here be seen working heedless of the latter's preferences in his own personal stylistic idiom. Perhaps what this newly uncovered developmental layer in the history of Burlington House reminds us above all is that principles of architectural style in the early 18th century, as in any other, were not fixed, but were instead continuously being probed, debated, and re-evaluated. Thank you.